Thank you for coming and welcome to the Annenberg Leadership Forum. The Annenberg Leadership Forum, formerly the Annenberg Leadership and Management Speaker Series, is an integral part of Harvey Mudd College's commitment to encouraging students to lead with integrity. Endowed in 2005 through a generous gift in honor of Trustee Howard III, class of 1989, the Walter and Leonore Annenberg Fund for Leadership Development showcases accomplished individuals who are recognized leaders in their fields. These public events engage the Harvey Mudd College community in important thought and discussion about the role of leadership in the world. Through the Annenberg Leadership Forum, Harvey Mudd and the Annenberg Foundation are helping to shape our students' understanding and practice of leadership. Past speakers have represented a wide range of leadership styles and a broad array of organizations, including Intel, Qualcomm, Microsoft, the Aerospace Corporation, Bloomberg, Yelp, Facebook, and Google. Last spring, the Annenberg series featured Harvey Mudd alum Ho Nam, class of 1988, co-founder and managing director of Altos Ventures. Mr. Nam joined President Nembhard for a conversation about what it means to be successful and what it means to do so with kindness and curiosity. This evening's conversation will focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Shaundra Shani B. Daly is the Q Family Professor of Practice in Electrical and Computer Engineering at Duke University. Her research focuses on the design, implementation, and evaluation of technologies, programs, and curricula to support inclusive excellence in STEM fields. Dr. Daly is co-founder and chief product officer of Kids Hack LLC. She holds a BS and MS in electrical and computer engineering from the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, Florida State University College of Engineering, and MS and PhD degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Lab. Ayanna Howard is Dean of the Ohio State University College of Engineering and is an accomplished roboticist, entrepreneur, and educator. Previously, she served as chair of the Georgia Institute Technology School of Interactive Computing in the College of Computing, as well as the founder and director of the Human Automation Systems Lab. Her career spans higher education, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the private sector. Dr. Howard is the founder and president of the board of directors of Zyrobotics, a Georgia Tech spinoff company that develops mobile therapy and educational products for children with special needs. Laurie Leshin has served as director of the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory since May 2022. And is a distinguished geochemist and space scientist with extensive leadership experience in academia and government, including senior positions at NASA. Dr. Leshin was president of Worcester Polytechnic Institute from 2014 to 2022 and previously served as dean of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute School of Science. At NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center from 2005 to 2008, she served as Director of Science, then Deputy Director for Science and Technology, leading strategy, planning, and implementation of more than 50 Earth and spaceflight projects. In 2010, Dr. Leshin became Deputy Associate Administrator of the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, overseeing human spaceflight. Yvonne Wassenaar has 30 years of experience scaling companies globally and driving transformation with technology. She currently serves as a board member of Arista Networks, Braze, JFrog, Forrester Research, Rubrik, and Harvey Mudd College. Wassenaar also is senior advisor in the technology sector for investors and startups. Most recently, she served as CEO of Puppet, the development operations platform trusted by enterprises to deliver better software faster. Prior to Puppet, Wassenaar was CEO of Airware, CIO at New Relic, and she held multiple leadership roles at VMware and Accenture. With many people concerned with how modern technology is used, Wassenaar champions its use to drive a safer, more efficient, and innovative planet. Our moderator this evening is Harvey Mudd College President Harriet B. Nembhard. President Nembhard is a leader in the field of industrial and operations engineering and a voice on the national level for transforming undergraduate STEM education. She has held academic leadership positions at University of Iowa, Oregon State University, and the Pennsylvania State University, where she was the founding director of the Center for Integrated Healthcare Delivery Systems. President Nembhard's research into co-curricular STEM education and its role in undergraduate identity formation received National Science Foundation funding, and she serves on the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Joint Roundtable on Advancing Change in Undergraduate STEM Education. Before I turn over tonight's program to President Nembhard, I hope you will please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists and welcoming them to Harvey Mudd College.
Well, many thanks to Tim Hussey for launching our program this evening. Many thanks to you for joining us for this conversation. As Tim mentioned, the UN Sustainable Development Goals will be the topic of our conversation this evening. I'm sure that many of you are aware that in addressing global challenges, much progress has been made on vaccines, on clean water, on access to education. And yet, within this agenda, as the deadline approaches for the 2030 agenda, there's a recognition that progress is stagnating. Earlier today, a group of the President's scholars turned an inward spotlight on work done here at Harvey Mudd that addresses the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what I'd like to do this evening is to invite us into a conversation with our distinguished panelists to talk about how Sustainable Development Goals are affected by work that is being done nationally. So I'm excited that they can offer their unique perspectives. I have 4 topics that I'd like to cover with them. And then we'll turn it over to you for a few questions before we close. So let's jump right into it. For the first topic, I'd like to hear from each of our panelists their perspective or philosophy or values or lens on the thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals at the high level, and then perhaps bringing it down to an example that might relate work that they're doing at their institutions or in their work to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, if I could start with you, Dr. Daly, could you get us started?
Sure. I was looking over there. That was a good try. That was a good try. You were trying to do them at the whole. Right back at you. All right. So good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Shani Daly. And so fundamentally, I'm interested in building capacity in communities while also challenging existing power structures. And so that might look like capacity building with respect to technical skills. So the kinds of things you need to participate in STEM, but that also might look like emotional resilience and well-being. And so overall, this was actually a fun exercise because I hadn't reflected on what I do in the context of the SDGs, but the mental and emotional well-being, the quality education, gender equity or equality, and then reducing inequalities, I'd say most relate to the work I do. So bringing that more into an example, I'm the one of the founders of the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education. And our mission very broadly is to prepare educators, administrators, staff to think about what it means to build inclusive learning environments. And so that might be policies, that might be classroom practices, like what are those things? Who are the students in the room, right? So what in engineering, what a STEM classroom looked like 50 years ago, right? It doesn't look like that now. And a lot of the times we're still using the same practices and the same policies. And that's why a lot of the inequities we have in STEM have remained, because we're not addressing who's in the room. And so what we're doing is thinking about identity it's in the name, right? Very inclusively, right? So we think about race and ethnicity, we think about gender identity, we think about sexual orientation, we think about class, we think about age, right? What are those students bringing into the classroom, and how do we think about making sure that everybody can participate, everybody can develop an understanding of what it means to be in STEM, and how do we make sure, right, that everybody feels like they belong? And so we don't have any student-centered interventions, right? We're not trying to give students directly the skills. We want the people who are responsible for welcoming those students into the classrooms, right, to be ready for that. And so we do a lot of professional development, a lot of new module and course development alongside those folks so that they can build those classroom spaces, so that they can build those departmental and institutional policies, and so that we're indirectly impacting undergraduate students, we're indirectly impacting K through 12 students. And so when I think about those sustainability development goals, that's how it plays out, at least in that context for the hat I wear there.
Thank you, Shani. Dean Howard, same question.
Yeah, so when I think about the sustainability goals in general, I think it's really a classification of what I think are humanity's fundamental rights. Wherever anyone is born, however they live, whoever they happen to appear or where, we have a right to food, we have a right to housing, we have a right to good health, we have a right to good jobs that allow us to have prosperity. And so when I think about what our role is, growing up, I was always taught that as you grow with privilege, it is now your responsibility to think about how do you then help others and think about the sustainability goals. That's really what it's about. It's those who have, how do you ensure that there's an equality among those that do not have? In terms of my own personal, I started off in science-driven robotics, actually at JPL.
Woo!
So how we know each other. And one of the things is I could have chosen a different path. I do artificial intelligence. In fact, my first neural network was designed at JPL in 1995. Right? And so, but I thought about, science and the value of science and how do we think about exploration and taking those lessons learned and apply it here on Earth. And those are the kinds of things I think of when we have universities like Harvey Mudd around how do you take your power, in this case, your STEM power, your STEM knowledge, and apply it for good. Back then, they didn't have the word social impact. Now it's a thing. But that is a thing. It's a responsibility, I think, that all of us have. Now I work in healthcare robotics. I focus on designing robotics for children with special needs, children who have motor disabilities. I can design robots for a lot of applications that would make a lot more money, but then this is an unmet need where if you think about the world of disabilities, it continues to grow. If you think about the world population, it continues to grow with respect to disabilities. If we have the power, who else is going to do it if we don't? And so I think about my value systems and what we can do in order to really think about the sustainability goals. And really, it's just the fundamental rights of humanity, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we all have access to those things.
Thank you. Dr. Leshin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm already super inspired. I don't know about the rest of you. You're amazing. So it's great to be here. I'm a huge Harvey Mudd fan, but first-time visitor to the campus. So really happy to be here and to get to talk about a subject that is truly impactful and also really timely with the UN COP29 is happening within just a couple of weeks, where the world comes together to talk about our progress on one of the most visible, I would say, SDGs, which is around climate change and climate action. So I'm the director of JPL, and for those of you that don't know us, we are located just in Pasadena. We're a part of Caltech and a part of NASA. Actually, tomorrow is our 88th birthday. I think we look fabulous. But we are older than NASA. We were actually founded when a bunch of people kept, blowing stuff up on campus at Caltech, and they kicked them off to go up in the mountains to do their rocketry tests back in 1936. And on Halloween Day, 1936, was the first successful rocket test, not launch, but rocket engine test up on the site of the current JPL. And the folks who founded the lab pretty quickly went from trying to build early rockets to worrying about what was on top of the rocket. And our history is that we actually built and launched America's very first satellite, Explorer 1, in 1958, in January of 1958, after Sputnik freaked everybody out. The Russian satellite, JPL, built the very first US satellite. And within 6 months of that, NASA was founded. And within a month of NASA being founded, JPL became a part of NASA, and we have been ever since. And everybody knows us for our cool Mars rovers, and we just launched a mission to Jupiter's moons, and don't get me started. What people don't know is that we, the planet we study most is the Earth, and that we have dozens and dozens of sensors flying right now, examining our home planet, really trying to understand how it changes and evolves. And I'll be happy to give a few examples of the kinds of work that we're doing in Earth-Science, perhaps in response to other questions. I will say the one other intersection I guess I'll draw here is, as a leader, I'm definitely a very values-driven leader, but I'm also the first woman leader of JPL. It only took 86 years for that to happen. And I take it really seriously. I think, the idea of gender equity and lifting everyone up, there have to be leaders like all of us on the stage who women can look to. And I definitely look at my own mom and the work that she did on things like getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed. And I realize now that she did that, and she used to take me to protests and things when I was like 6 years old. And she did that so that I could do this. And I think the idea of big goals like the SDGs are things that connect us across generations, across nations, and around the world. And to me, that's a super inspiring thing about them.
Thank you so much. Trustee Wassenaar.
First off, it's a huge pleasure to be here. When I thought about this and a little bit about my background, there was a long laundry list of things I do, but fundamentally, I was born and raised in what's now called Silicon Valley, and I've spent a lot of time in the innovation center of the world, we like to think, though innovation is spreading everywhere. And I work a lot now, both with large companies, but very importantly with young entrepreneurs. And to me, when I think about the UN sustainability goals, and what I hope particularly for some of the younger folks in the audience, is to really adapt different mindsets for how we accomplish what we want to do. So when I think about the sustainability goals, a lot of people talk to me about climate change and they're really worried. And I think there's a lot we can do in terms of reducing the amount of emissions that we put into the climate. And yet I truly believe the real differentiation is going to be figuring out how to take the bad stuff we've already put there and suck it out. And so kind of changing from kind of an incremental, how do we make things incrementally better, to how do we fundamentally rethink the achievement? Because when we look at 2030, it's not that far away. And I really believe that we need to, and we have the creativity to think differently and show up differently and be more creative in solving some of the hardest problems we have. For me personally, kind of echoing a lot of what the other panelists have said, I think for us to truly meet the sustainability goals on a global basis requires that we have a lot of diversity in terms of experience, perspectives, sense of self and community coming to the table to think about the problems, and to not be kind of the holier than thou, I'm going to sit here in the US and solve the problems around the world. Because in fairness, I don't truly understand the problems around the world. And one of my first ever angel investments was when I took a tech tour in Africa, and I was in Nigeria, and they had a tech conference which was enabled by the cloud. The cloud brought an incredible amount of computing and software power into the continent. And this woman I invested in, she was raised in the US, but she was of Nigerian parents. She went back to Nigeria to start a company to safely bring medicine from the pharmaceutical companies directly to the people who needed it. And that's because it turns out, I didn't know this, in Nigeria, there's a black market and there's a lot of fake drugs. And she actually had somebody in her family almost die because of the fact they couldn't get the medicine that they were told that they should get. And one of the things that really stuck with me is the importance of empowering people to solve the problems in the communities that they have versus thinking that we're going to sit in one place and solve everything. So I believe it's really important for us to think about those things. And so I have done things such as invest in entrepreneurial activities that are going on in Africa, in India, as well as in the US. And then also doing work to help bring more diverse people into venture investing, into startups, into CEO positions, and into board positions where they can have not only higher degree of influence, but more creativity and more connectivity into a lot of the communities that we're trying to really help.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm hearing quite a through line of just the importance of the relationships across the board. So I really appreciate the perspectives that you bring there. I want to pivot a little bit, but somewhat tied to what you were just speaking about, Yvonne, to look at preparing the next generation of Sustainable Development Goal innovators and what that will take in terms of technology as well as our focus in higher ed. So wherever any of you might feel to jump in on this question, we can just have a bit of a conversation. Some of the things that I'm thinking about are around technology-rich learning environments. We've heard AI more recently, but the use of technology in higher ed has been a continuing spectrum of opportunities. I'm also thinking about how STEM disciplines are working to integrate emerging technologies into the curriculum. So in that area of preparing the next generation, I'll open that up for anyone. Who might like to start to think about how we might prepare?
I'll start. So I think one of the things is preparation is, I would say, is the circle of life. It requires faculty and instructors to rethink and relearn. It also requires students to be open to that relearning and working together. We are in a new age. If you think about artificial intelligence and how you integrate it into your core curriculum, when you're in a new age, it's this shared learning. Faculty and professors don't have all the answers. They had it 100 years ago, but not today. And so having that adaptation between students and professors, I think, is important, but also thinking about the whys. One of the things I worry about, for example, with AI, with all the server farms, we could probably now at this point provide energy for the entire world just based on one day of ChatGPT. And so thinking about how do we think about education, understanding that we're also having some very, very negative impacts at the same time. That requires a shared conversation of what we should do, what we shouldn't do, how we can be more responsible when we integrate these emerging technologies, because every single emerging technology is a dual-use technology. What that means is that every positive, there's also a negative. And it's our role to make sure that the positives outweigh the negatives, but there are both. We have to be open and honest about that.
I mean, I can build on to it in terms of what I'm hoping the educational institutions like Harvey Mudd, some of these other fine institutions are preparing their students to do when they come into the world. If they decide to go into the corporate world, many folks go on to continue in academia, but we love giving Harvey Mudd students and others into the entrepreneurial space. And part of that is, and I have 3 kids of my own who are all teenagers, and you all grew up in a digital era and you think differently and you have different abilities than some of us who grew up with pen and paper. And it's not that one's better than the other, but they're different and there's a different appreciation of how the world works. But from where I sit, the things that are most important, one is curiosity and challenge. So on the server farm front, I find this really fascinating. I worked at a company and all of a sudden our AWS bill got really high and we challenged the engineers to get it more efficient. They got it twice as efficient as we asked. And what we realized is we never asked them to look at efficiency. And so one of the things that somebody just was saying the other day to me about ChatGPT is if I go ask Chat, or if I say, ask ChatGPT something, and then I say, oh, thank you, it uses a lot of server power to figure out how to respond to my thank you.
Yeah.
It is actually not good to be polite with ChatGPT. However, there are really people who are really smart and they challenge that with curiosity and they're like, well, do we really need to send it to a large language model or do we have different purpose models for different things? And can we segment that out? And do we really need to use all of that power or can we be more intelligent about it? So the first thing that I'd say is it's super important to bring that curiosity and challenge because the world's moving so fast. We can't teach you what to know, but we can help you practice showing up in that way. The other thing is, it's really important to break down the barriers of these different fields that we studied. And one of the most interesting podcasts that I listened to recently was talking about the integration and relationship between physics and AI. And the fact that AI has been incredibly helpful with people who are studying physics, but that a lot of the core concepts in physics and how you learn to think in physics and solve those problems has been incredibly powerful in building neural networks and how we develop AI. And if you look at it, you have folks like Fei Li who are now like starting companies. You have all these physicists who are at OpenAI and other places. And so you start to realize like there's not a field. You're no longer a biologist or a chemist or a computer scientist or a physicist. You're solving hard problems, and most likely the best solution is going to be the integration of those different skill sets together. And so I'm super encouraged by, one, the fact that at Harvey Mudd there's an integration of liberal arts into the sciences, because there's a lot of hard philosophical and community questions that need to be solved with all this technology that we're building, but also the fact that when I come here, there's so many students who are studying multiple fields, and that the faculty is looking at how do we put computing into biology? How do we start to intermix these skills? And if there's one piece of advice that I'd suggest is, you know, back to that curiosity, spread across the boundaries. Don't let the last several hundred years of advancements in a certain field confine you, but rather look to reach beyond and find the power of that integration. So that's my hope for all of you. Educating
Awesome.
students.
And I think kind of building on that and combining with something you said earlier about Nigeria and about sort of solving problems in local contexts. I think to me, the real power comes not from the technology, but it's the technology plus. It's technology plus solving a real world problem in a real world context. That is like the magic that can happen when when students actually are confronted and we say we want our students to go out and change the world, or that we want them to go out and be impactful and problem solvers. You don't just learn that by staying in a classroom. You have to develop, solving problems is a practice, not problems at the back of the book, not homework problems, real world problems, right? Not that some homework is not important. Do your homework. But quickly figuring out, more importantly, how to get out in the world. And so before coming to JPL, I was president of a university called Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI in Worcester, Mass. And our thing was project-based learning. And by the time I left, we had gotten it to where 90% of our students were having these off-campus project experiences in project centers all over the world. And the problems were focused at the intersection of technology and society. And it was just, again, it was a magical and transformational experience for students to be able to be thinking like, oh, okay, I kind of bring this tech knowledge, but guess what? A lot of real world problems don't need that biggest tech hammer you have, as you just were talking about. Well, maybe it doesn't need quite as large a language model. Maybe it just needs a small language model for that part of it, right? How do you figure out how to smartly apply technology to solve problems that actually really matter to people? There's a ton of that behind the Sustainable Development Goals, I think.
Mm-hmm. Shani, I know maybe you can give us some, perhaps some specific examples of where I know your work has focused a lot around accessibility and universal accessibility. Maybe as we think about these opportunities for different types of learning environments, have you been successful in sort of thinking about a methodology to do that or steps for doing that?
As far as creating the actual learning environment or?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, it shifted on me. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of universal design principles that have been around a lot. One of the things that I think really inspired the work that we're doing for this particular alliance is you have technologists who can go through 4 years and never really learn about a human, right? So we're solving
Exactly.
real world problems
Yeah.
that
Oh,
impact humans, and we don't know anything about humans,
no, no.
right? And so especially in this age of AI, right, you're relying on historical data a lot of times, but have no sense of what the history is behind those data, right? So I'll take redlining for an example, right, where it was like, okay, these folks are not getting mortgages, but then we're building fintech that builds on data that was based off of redlining, and so then we're replicating old bad decisions, old biased practices, and that's just becoming a part of our practice. And so when I think about these spaces, right, it's not just about who's in the classroom and developing practices, but it's also how are you integrating an understanding of history, of the social sciences, and things like that into our more technical curriculum, so that our students at least have enough knowledge, right? I used to say to be dangerous, but then that can go either way, right?
Yeah.
But enough knowledge where they can talk to people who are more
Question, right?
fluent.
You can question.
Yeah, right. Ask
Question
the
the
right
system.
questions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to work with people who are more deeply ingrained in those fields, so that we're not continuing to replicate the harms that have been on people.
But I think, one of the things based on that, students in this audience, though, you have to be bold because unfortunately, the tech world does not necessarily value the liberal arts or the humanities. In fact, oh, you have the soft skills. Oh, you deal with humans.
Soft
Right?
skills.
This
I
is
hate that.
this is
I hate
this is
soft skills.
this is a norm. But it's what you need. And I think a lot of times is you do have to be bold to challenge because you will get the, oh, that's sweet. Ethics? Why do you need ethics for launching spacecrafts? Oh, because like they have nuclear on them, right? And so I think one of the challenges to you because of this great curriculum and this boundary is you are also the ones that have the quality education that can be in the rooms and say, this is actually important. In fact, this is a non-negotiable, but you have to have the chutzpah to be able to believe in yourself in those rooms.
Yeah.
Another,
I
but you got more questions. We could go on about this one.
For
But
tech.
no, go
I'll
ahead.
stick up for tech. We're not all like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I think this is really important because there has historically been a brand. And I think in today's kind of divisive country that we live in, we do tend to put people in boxes. And I do want to, I will say there's absolutely the folks who'll go after the 10X engineer and, whatever he wants. I don't care how rude he is. And it's always a he and da-da. And absolutely, I will say that does exist. I do see it. What I also see are amazing, amazing companies who have incredible values, who one of the things that I love, and again, I go back to my kids, I am less concerned about what brand name they have on their resume because ultimately in Silicon Valley, it's what you do that matters. It's the impact that you have. And I do think by having that courage to show up with the values and the purpose that you have, like one of the things that's been interesting, and one of my colleagues from Accenture is here. When I was growing up at Accenture, somebody said jump, and I'd say, how high? And then all of a sudden I'm running a software company, and I'm like, we need to get this project done. I'm like, oh, sorry, it's Friday. I got plans. And I look to the other old person in the room. They're like, did they just say that? Can I fire them? Oh, wait, no, that's the new culture. And I'm like, okay. And so I do think there's been a shift. And a lot of what gets talked about is what is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? Do I align with your mission? And your mission may be to go to Mars. Your mission may be to bring clean drinking water to people in undeveloped countries. You could have a lot of different missions, but what I would say is it's very important, one, to find places to work where you have that mission culture alignment, because there are amazing places you can work. And the other is maybe start that company, maybe be that person. And that's where I think now that we have different sources of funding and more democratization to who can participate in funding and who can lead and who can innovate and who can start, you actually see a big shift in the culture. So I accept we have been that way in the past, and I'd put forward to you that we are broader, kinder, more purpose-driven now.
Well,
Not all of us, but most of us.
I love the idea of having enough knowledge to question. And what I'm hearing you add to that, Yvonne, is also having enough knowledge to not only question, but initiate. But you've got to know enough to know what needs to be initiated or what needs to be challenged. Another thing that I want to have a few minutes for us to get into as well is academic industry partnerships. Now, Yvonne, of course, you have a tremendous breadth of experience in industry, and we also have, from an academic lens, what we need from those relationships, and industry perhaps has a lens on what they would need from academic partnerships. So I'd just like to see if any of you have comments on what role or what's needed from these academic industry partnerships, especially as we want to think about accelerating the deployment and addressing SDGs.
I mean, I can start a little bit. I mean, I think when I think about this problem and opportunity, there's a whole host of things that we can do to strengthen this powerful connection. There's absolutely the formal arrangements that happen between large multinationals and academic institutions to go after really, really big causes. Underneath that, and I think equally, if not more powerful from what I've seen, is when we start to get the crossing of boundaries. So we get somebody like Ollie, who is a professor at Berkeley and starts a company called Databricks, which is one of the most valuable private companies right now on the cusp of IPO. And he still teaches at Berkeley. And you get physicists who are taking time from their academic career and studies to go work at OpenAI or Anthropic or Mistral or wherever it is. And so we're actually integrating, and we're getting people who are in academia reaching out and actually influencing and driving in practical, tactical ways, and then being able to bring resources back. Because one of the big frustrations that I hear about now is, it's hard for academia to compete in some areas of AI because they can't get a hold of the compute power. They don't have enough money. And like here are all these, venture capitalists funding all these things over here. Well, what about us? We're more than smart enough, and we absolutely have the aspiration and the interest. How do I get my hands on some of that? And so I do think what we're finding, at least in the startup ecosystem, are ways where we can better integrate. And it's, again, not a firm line. You're in academia, you're in industry, but can we be more fluid and bring students in and have, people guest lecture and go back and forth so that we have more empathy, understanding, but also that diversity of perspective to really propel.
We have a first-year design experience for all of our engineers on campus. Everybody has to go through it when they come in. And Dr. Ann Satterback has just done a fabulous job of setting that up. But I was talking to some students earlier about a makerspace. So we have a makerspace on campus. It's for students to build things. But the entire semester is structured around a real-world problem, as we were talking about earlier, that they're going through the process of not only brainstorming a solution for, or multiple solutions for, but actually building prototypes that some of them actually end up in the real world. So I think we have these kinds of opportunities to immediately connect students with what they would be doing in the field, which some of the research I've found is when you get that very early experience, it actually helps with retention later, right? You know, when we were going through, it was like, eat all your vegetables, right? So take all your calc, take all your engineering.
Can't
math,
do anything
take all your-
interesting in the first
can't
year.
touch anything, right? Don't, right? Don't,
Second year, even.
yeah, you know, until you get to your junior year. But right, having these experiences very early on, getting a chance to connect with the outside world, so to speak, and industry, I think plays a big role in providing those kinds of opportunities, especially for courses like that.
Do you see any perhaps more specific desires or opportunities for the private sector to foster innovation in any, do any, and this is for any of you, in any particular ways on challenges that the SDGs are facing? Or do your students do that necessarily in your first year design course? Or, you know, would there be other possibilities to explore for private sector investment?
Well, I've actually seen some so companies driven by typically profit, if they have a board, stocks. Some of the sustainability goals are not money makers. If I think about climate change, I might have goals with respect to SEC, but you know, scope, but you know, no one's going to scream if you don't make it. And so I think some of it is when companies, and I'm starting to see this, when companies actually want to do good, they pair up with academics in order to cover some of the, okay, we know academia can do it because this is part of our mission. It doesn't destroy our stocks or our quarterly or any of that. But then we can also say, look, we've done things around climate. We've done things around health. We've done things around equity and equality because we've partnered with someone else. And so they get double. They get the, oh, great, you're doing good. But they also are making their profits and they're making their quarterlies and they're providing their dividends. I'm starting to see that a lot more with larger companies at least.
And I think in some cases, so JPL is a federal lab, so we're not really industry, but we build a lot of stuff and have a lot of people that do big things at scale in a ton of collaboration with universities. And, you know, we have 700 interns a year and 1,000 people with badges who are sort of visitors and connected to us, a lot of faculty from a lot of different places. But when we want to go after a big idea, a big mission, that's not just us. It's always in collaboration with academia. And no single professor at a university could build the thing that we're ultimately going to do. And so it's can be a very virtuous collaboration, I think, between large organizations and small. But I think your point is really a good one, which is, I think one of the challenges is we're quite rigid in academia about, you know, who counts as a faculty member and what counts as a credit. And again, some of that's really valid, right? It could be very easy to abuse systems if we take things too far. But the idea of thinking about where learning can happen and how learning can happen and who it can deliver educational experiences, I think there's some room for innovation. And then I think there's a lot of room for people moving in and out more. And it's very challenging. You know, I'm a professor at Caltech as part of the role that I have at JPL. And I will tell you, we're not good at this at Caltech. If someone wants to start their own company or go work, you know, they have to essentially relinquish tenure. And so again, it's a challenging thing, but I think it's worth the upside is really high, the upside potential. And so I think it's really worth thinking about, not for everybody, not, you know, but the opportunities there to just be more innovative in how we're collaborating. And professors of the practice, I think, are a great example too. That's a great way at WPI. We were constantly bringing in, you know, people from industry to serve as part of the institution. We didn't do as much of the other, which is having our faculty go out into industry and get that experience. And I think it's really valuable.
And I would say, building on that, another way that I've seen great integration of academia into the entrepreneurial world is in advisors. And so increasingly, you'll see a lot of these startups or a lot of these venture companies or private equity companies look for folks that have deep expertise in particular fields that they can, you know, help on the due diligence, but then also help kind of coach the team and draw some of the connections. And I do think that back and forth is so important.
Yeah.
And equally, I know folks who go, and like I said, myself, like I'll go and I'll do guest lecturing. And it's just because it's hard in academia to keep up with everything that's moving, and particularly in the practical sense. And I think when we're trying to inspire the next generation of leaders and builders to think about how to solve the problem, sometimes it's helpful to hear how people are doing things in the real world, because in some regards, I feel time moves more slowly in academia. My dad was a professor for 45 years. I love academia. But it does move a little bit more slowly because it's very thoughtful and it's very, very precise. And it's such a contradiction to the world that I live in, which is, the old fail fast.
Go fast and break.
And it's like, take risks. And what's interesting is the reason that we're seeing some innovations happen much more quickly in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, even beyond like the large companies and certainly faster than government, is because you can fail. And so like if you look at SpaceX, love or hate Elon, that's your decision. But if you look at their ability to develop some of the technology they developed, it's because they have the money and the funding and the risk culture to go and try it. And they look at, a rocket launch blow up in front of their face and they're like, yes, oh my God, look at all that data we just got. This is awesome. Now let's go do it again. We'll do it a little bit better. You would never do that, unless you had that venture money in that. So I think that integration of those different cultures, you need the super smart people to know what to do with that data and to build the next thing. But you also sometimes need that permission and that funding and that ability to creatively try and learn. Because if you have to get it 100% right, 1,000% right, the first time you ever do it in real life, that's just going to take a long time.
I think what I'm also hearing and thinking about is that there's some degree of mapping between the problems that need to be solved, the companies that might not be the obvious ones who can be partners in solving those problems with academia, right? So I'm also hearing that there's perhaps a way to think differently about how we understand that space, who's working in those spaces, who might make good partners, how academia might be good advisors, and to do some broader thinking about the opportunity to transfer across some of those boundaries. Well, why don't I have 4 more questions, and that was after me narrowing down my list, but why don't I turn and see if you have anything on your mind that you would like to ask any of our panelists.
Technology at work.
There it is.
Okay, I saw McKenna's hand right here.
Hi. So you guys spoke on the intersection of academia and industry, but as we talk about like the global, like United Nations sustainable development, how do you think government, the intersection of government, academia, and just I guess like industry tie into like connectivity and potential progress?
Well, I can talk a little bit about it from the space exploration side. I mean, governments, while there is a very quickly blossoming private sector capability here, especially on Earth observing, which is really great, most of the big breakthroughs and also the sort of finger on the pulse of the Earth from space is still being funded by governments. And so at JPL, we're doing things like, certain parts of the government are sort of more monitoring and watching the change. We are trying to drive the frontier kind of measurements that have never been done before. And we do that in collaboration with industry. We do it, almost all of it, in collaboration with other countries. Our 2 most recent large Earth science missions, the one launched just over a year ago called SWAT, which was joint with the French, and it looks at Earth's fresh water from space for the first time globally. So every 3 weeks, we take a complete global census of all of Earth's fresh water, the oceans too, but we've been studying the oceans from space for a long time. The real breakthrough here is to be able to sense the height to within an inch of millions of rivers and lakes around the world. Imagine, I mean, Earth's fresh water is very key to the SDGs, and now we really have a pulse on it, and we know what's happening with Earth's water, and states are using it to track reservoirs, and we're using it to understand flooding in Bangladesh, which is a huge problem being exacerbated by climate change, all of these sort of things. Our next big launch is a mission with India. It's the actually single largest technological collaboration between the US and India is this radar mission that we're building together called NISAR, which is going to do what SWAT's doing for water, NISAR is going to do for the land and the biomass, above ground biomass, so the forests. It can sense how our planet's biology is sort of breathing from space. And I think, those are billion-dollar endeavors, right? And to this day, there really are things that I think need to be supported by governments. And to me, the value is not only the great science we do, but also the global collaboration. And you can imagine there's a lot of interest in collaboration with India right now in the US. And the fact that this huge collaboration is happening is a fantastic thing. And it's happening, country to country. It's also happening engineer to engineer, right? Because we have our people embedded right now in Bangalore, India, working to finalize the spacecraft and get ready to launch it from India in early next year. So there's very exciting things happening, I feel like. And you will see a big presence at COP next week from governments all over the world. One of the things you'll hear about there's a lot more focus on greenhouse gases, especially methane, which is a much stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, causes per molecule much more warming. And also it's possible that if you stopped emitting it, it comes out of the atmosphere much faster than CO2, much lower residence time in the atmosphere. And yet it's hard to see, it's invisible, but we can see it from space. And we're tracking it from the International Space Station right now with an instrument we built that's looking down. And so you're going to be hearing more about trying to track methane super emitters and capping those things. And again, this is, and future measurements there are made in collaboration with the private sector and with philanthropic dollars, new players coming in all the time to try and help us do better there. And so I think if you watch the news around COP, you'll hear more about those kind of things too. I'm proud that our government, this is some of the things that our tax dollars pay for, is to really help us understand how our planet's changing.
Those are great
I can
examples.
just add a short, small example that's very, very different from that. That's super cool. I want your job.
Okay.
Not sure I'm qualified, but it'd be a great job to have. One of the things when I talked about like the tech tour in Nigeria, what was really interesting is the government was investing in startup incubators. Mm-hmm. And part of why I was there and a lot of other entrepreneurs were there were to act as mentors and to potentially do angel investment. But you had AWS that was giving away cloud resources. You had GitHub, you had other large software companies that were providing the capabilities. And the focus of this one incubator was to help rise people up out of poverty. And so, if you look at Lagos, like there's just tremendous poverty. And we think about, I need to build the next, $100 billion company. They're thinking about how can we help people get one or two levels above where they are today. And, there was one business that was incredible. It was, teaching people how to clean apartments. And so the people who were slightly ahead income-wise could hire these folks, and then they got rated. And if they, rated really well, they'd be taught how to fix air conditioners. And they could go and they could build these skills, and then they could go off on their own and earn more money. And all of a sudden, you're finding like you can rise people up out of poverty. That's a very micro example, but I think this combination, everything from the really big, massive government investments to what are we doing in communities, in culture, in, kind of this intermixing of government sponsorship, large companies, entrepreneurs, the people who want to solve the problems, I think is where you get that power in that spectrum of what you can do.
Huge ecosystem plays, yeah.
And if I can add one more quick example, we had a federally funded artificial intelligence institute funded 1 year before ChatGPT came out, right? So y'all know, Dean Howard was just saying, right, she was working on neural networks in 1995. I was working on neural networks then too, right? So AI has been a thing for a very, very long time, but suddenly GPT came out and it's like, everybody panic. AI is this new thing. And right? Y'all saw that, right? Wasn't just me? Okay, just making sure. But it actually positioned us quite nicely. So my team was over education and workforce development. And so suddenly you had these policymakers who were like, okay, what is this? What are we supposed to do? How do we think about it?
Right.
And so some of our mission shifted from creating these programs and thinking about it to advocacy in the political space. So we had those opportunities to sit at roundtables, speaking in DC, talking to legislators, right? What should the policies look like? How should we think about cybersecurity? How should we think about education? How should we think about diversifying the workforce? And so there's other ways as well, even beyond government funding, to engage in that sphere based on the work that you do that's very related to all of those goals around equity and inclusion.
Well, I wish we had more time. I'm sure there are more questions. I certainly have some. I'm sure that you do as well. But I think that just portends and indicates how much need for additional energy and attention the SDGs call for. The 2030 deadline is upon us practically. I think what we can understand is, as we've seen here, some tremendous work, some tremendous opportunities. And I would just like to encourage us all to continue to explore where we can not only be, but help to produce the change makers that the world needs. So thank you so much for being here. Help me thank my panelists again.